Where we're going to move next is into the area of queries. We've got tables now. Now we want to query those tables. We want to ask our database for specific information. You can create very simple select queries, more complex select queries. You can get into, depending on your environment and so on, we technically can get into update, append, cross-tab, delete queries, the whole 9 yards. You can do some crazy stuff in here, which is why you want to be careful when we're working with our database, particularly in the SQL environment, because in the SQL environment, we have the ability to go ahead and start manipulating stuff if we want to. Now, most of the time, we're going to be working with select tables. Select tables where we're just reaching out and organizing information in a fashion that allows me to see information. So let's go ahead and let's actually start creating a simple query or two. So instead of working in our external data tab, we're done. We've got our data now. We're going to click on our Create tab. Our Create tab opens up the ability to do lots of things, such as designing tables and so forth. We can also design queries or use the query wizard. We can do forms and reports and so on. And in this case, we're going to focus here on queries. Now, there is a query wizard, and you can play with the query wizard if you'd like. There are areas I'll use wizards in Access, and you'll see one in a few minutes. There are others that I find them to be a bigger pain than a help. This is one of those that I find them to be a bigger nuisance than a help, with very few exceptions. I tend to use the Query Designer, and we can invoke that simply by clicking on this little button here called Query Design, again, under our Create tab. Doing so puts us into the Designer tool, and it gives us a list of tables, at least by default, a list of tables that are available to us within our Access database. Now, I could actually query another query, or I could get a list of both. Why would I query another query? Well, sometimes I have to organize things from a couple of other files where there's not a logical link, and then link that to yet another file somewhere. So I may actually layer my queries. Be careful not to go too deep. That can really slow things down. In most cases, it's not necessary. It's not always true, but in most cases, it's not needed. So at this point, we're going to select a single table. We're going to go after the big one, our customer file. So we're going to double-click on it to add, and you'll see that it dropped it into our query window in the background, our Query Designer. We're going to go ahead and click Close at this point, because that's all I'm really looking for right now. We're going to expand this so we can actually see what's hiding in here. So now, inside of our little table view here, we've got a list of all of these fields that are available to us from Passport. Most of these, they're all defined again in that data dictionary, but most of these are pretty straightforward to read. You may find a couple that are a little obscure, but for the most part, the guys have done a nice job of making these pretty readable, such as our customer number, right? There's a sales rep. We have our customer name, and we're going to come back to sales rep shortly. We have our customer name, which I am going to add, and I'm just double-clicking. We can also left-click and drag and drop this down here to add address 1. Address 2, again, double-click. City, state, zip code. I'm just telling it what fields I want to use in my query. Well, that's all great. I've got some basic contact information here, but maybe I want to go down a little bit here, and I'm scooting way down because I want to go after some sales data. Specifically, I want to go after my sales current period. So we're going to double-click on that one, and it's going to add that to our list of fields that we have chosen to go after here. So at this point, I have actually just created a very simple query. I'm not limiting data, I'm limiting fields. In other words, I'm going to look at all records still if I execute this query, but I'm only going to look at this handful of fields that I've requested inside of this query, as opposed to all of these fields that are up here. Now, we can execute this right now by clicking Run. And immediately we're presented with the data that's available to us in the customer file. That, in this case, matches our criteria, which is none. There is no criteria. It just gives me those fields, though. So I'm going to go back up here. We're going to click on this little button here, this View button. And if you don't see this icon, you can drop it down and go find Design View. But that icon represents Design View. We want to go back to our Design View now. I tend to as I build a query, especially if I'm going to get complex with linking tables, which we'll cover in just a minute, I tend to test my query multiple times as I get deeper into it, because if you break it as you get somewhere along the ways by putting in some goofy link or searching for something that doesn't exist, that sort of thing, you'll want to know where you broke it, so that you don't have to go back through 5-6 steps, and instead you just move back one and say, okay, I tested it before I started this step, it worked fine. What did I do here? What did I do wrong?